Stanley Yelnats was on a bus, a very hot, bumpy bus. It was taking him to Camp Green Lake. Stanley was innocent, but it didn't matter. He had been found guilty of a crime he didn't commit. Now he was on his way to a place that was supposed to turn bad boys good. Stanley wasn't bad, just unlucky. He clutched his duffel bag, his knuckles white. The other boys on the bus were bigger, tougher. They looked at Stanley with hard eyes. He tried not to make eye contact. "Just keep your head down," he told himself. "It's going to be a long summer." The bus rumbled on, kicking up dust devils in its wake. The landscape outside was bleak and unforgiving. Just miles and miles of dirt and scrub. Stanley had never seen anything like it. It was like driving to the end of the world. As the bus pulled up to a rusty gate, Stanley felt a shiver run down his spine. This was it, Camp Green Lake. He took a deep breath and stepped off the bus, the sun beating down on his back. There was no turning back now. They gave him an orange jumpsuit and boots. The jumpsuit was itchy and too big. The boots were stiff and rubbed blisters on his heels. He looked at himself in the reflection of the metal bunk bed. He looked ridiculous, like a giant overripe orange. But at least he wasn't the only one. All the boys at Camp Green Lake wore the same ridiculous outfit. He felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see a tall, muscular boy with a shaved head. "Name's Armpit," the boy said, his voice deep. "Stanley," he mumbled back. Armpit grunted and pointed to a small wooden chest at the foot of the bunk. "You get one of those. Put your stuff in there." Stanley hesitantly opened the chest. It was dusty and smelled musty. He carefully placed his few belongings inside, wondering if he'd ever see them again. The warden ran Camp Green Lake. She was a tall, imposing woman with long black hair and piercing blue eyes. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like a bug under a microscope. "Welcome to Camp Green Lake, boys," the warden said, her voice surprisingly soft. "This is not a summer camp. This is not a place for fun and games. This is a place for hard work and discipline." Her eyes scanned the group, lingering on Stanley for a moment longer than the others. "You are here to dig holes," she continued, her voice hardening. "You will dig from sunrise to sunset. You will dig until your hands bleed. And when you're done digging, you will think about what you've done to deserve this punishment." Stanley swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. He hadn't done anything to deserve this, but it was clear that arguing wouldn't do any good. The warden's word was law at Camp Green Lake. Section 4. Green Lake? More like Dust Bowl. Where was the lake? Stanley wondered. All he saw was dirt. Miles and miles of dry, cracked earth. It hadn't rained at Camp Green Lake in over 100 years. The only thing green about it was the warden's fingernails. She painted them a bright, unnatural green. Like a poisonous snake, Stanley thought. Every morning the sun rose over the barren landscape, turning the sky a fiery orange. The heat was relentless, baking the ground until it was hard as rock. Stanley would wake up sweating, his throat parched. He longed for a cool breeze, a single drop of rain. But there was none to be found, just the endless, oppressive heat. The air was thick with dust, coating everything in a fine layer of grime. Stanley coughed, his lungs burning. He missed the smell of grass, the feel of rain on his skin. He would have given anything for a tall glass of ice-cold lemonade. But at Camp Green Lake, such luxuries were just a distant memory. Section 5. Digging for answers. Every day, Stanley and the other boys dug holes. 5 feet wide, 5 feet deep. The sun beat down on their backs as they swung their shovels, the metal hot to the touch. The work was backbreaking, but they weren't allowed to stop, not even for a minute. "Keep digging, you worthless slugs!" Mr. Pendanski, one of the camp counselors, would yell, his face red with the heat. Mr. Pendanski was a skinny, wiry man with a bad case of sunburn and a permanent scowl etched on his face. He seemed to enjoy making their lives miserable. Stanley didn't understand why they had to dig these holes. They weren't planting anything in them. They weren't building anything. They just dug them, day after day, under the watchful eyes of the counselors. It was as if they were digging to nowhere. "What are we digging for?" Stanley had asked Zero, a quiet boy who rarely spoke. Zero just shrugged his shoulders, his dark eyes filled with a wisdom beyond his years. Stanley had a feeling Zero knew more than he let on, but he wasn't saying.